Welcome to Inside the She Cave, Trailblazers, Innovators, Rule Breakers. I am your host, Cindy Glanzrock. On today's episode, we have an especially perky guest, Sarah Thornton, a sociologist, an ethnographer, and an anthropologist. She's a well-known author who writes about art, culture, and women. Today, we dive into her latest book called Tits Up, which explores the intrigue, mystery, and universal truths of breasts as a symbol of femininity. I first met Sarah at a book signing in New York City, and she told me, "Nice jugs," and that is how she signed my book. I will never forget that compliment. Sarah dives in and explores in great detail the unique aspects of breasts, from the way they are perceived at strip clubs to milk banks. It's fascinating to learn about the history of breast representation over the decades and the shifts in changing societal attitudes. Hearing about these diverse experiences and women's varied perspectives can lead to great respect, empathy, and appreciation of breasts, or as Sarah calls them, tits. So there is no one better to educate us about the history and the everyday complexities of breasts than Sarah Thornton. So we are here in New York City in the She Cave with Sarah Thornton in her She Cave in San Francisco. Sarah is one of the women that I actually read and listen to. So I don't read a lot of books because I use Audible and podcasts, but Sarah's, for some reason, are so captivating. I can at least read 3 or 4 chapters without falling asleep. So Sarah, thank you for being a trailblazer, innovator, and rule breaker, and a smarty pants. Now, I know we're talking about boobs today, but you are a smarty pants. And what I mean by that is you're just kind of adorable and funny and quick-witted. And I loved seeing you at your most recent New York City book signing, because I know you've had them all over the world and the country. When you signed my book Tits Up, you wrote about jugs and sort of wishing my jugs well. So I have a whole new appreciation for my new Tits Up book, which I've bought already about 5 of. So thank you. We'll start with the last book, since you've had 4 books, all equally fascinating, and you are so fascinating, your life story. So please do share all in the hour we have together. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And thank you for the praise. Tits Up is the first book that I've narrated myself. I loved reading in the studio for 4 days. Luckily, it's only an 8-hour listen. But my sister, who's an actress and is very critical of her older sister, she said I actually did an okay job. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for reading me. I'm grateful.
Well, I have to say, you sent me this bio, and I was so enthralled with watching all the different videos on your sarah-thornton.com page. But more importantly, you've lived a lot of lives. I mean, you told me you're a Canadian English woman. You're living in San Francisco. You've been married to a man and had 2 children. You're married to a woman and have a 20-month-old, if I recall.
Correct.
And you had a mother that waited till after she had, I think she's 3 children. Is that correct?
2, just
2.
My sister and I. Yeah.
Just 2 of you, to go back to school and get her degree and learn about art, which of course we know where that rubbed off on you. And we also learned about the fact that she loved to read, as did you. You were a prolific reader. So
absolutely.
Besides the beginnings, because I know several people, such as Mike Lewis, asked you about your beginnings, like why a writer after being a reader. Can you just tell me how you dove into that? I think you only had 1 real job, if I'm correct. I think it was at one of the advertising firms.
I've had a few real jobs, but not many compared to most people my age. I also was a full-time academic. So I taught full-time at Sussex University for, 6 years or so. And then I worked in an ad agency for a year. And otherwise, I've been a freelancer, writing books and journalism, all, and to some degree, an adjunct professor doing tidbits of teaching all of these many years. I mean, I think that the drive behind my research and writing is that I love learning, and I love being on the steep part of the learning curve. And I like intellectual adventure. And so one of the iconic women for me from a very young age is actually Alice in Wonderland. Now, I know she's fictional, and maybe she was just a girl, but she was quite brave and experimental. And like a lot of ethnographers, she was changed by the experience of doing her research. Mm-hmm. So, she drank the potion. She got very big. She drank something else. She got very small. So I come from that branch of sociology, which is kind of hits upon anthropology. And so I call myself an ethnographer. It's a certain kind of research and a certain kind of writing. Although I do journalism, I've never been to journalism school, and I'm not... I would call myself a writer first before anything else. I'm always changed by experiences. And so, when although I did a degree in art history, I went on to do my PhD in the sociology of youth culture and did that on nightclubs and raves and music culture. Then I did a couple of books on art in the art world, like 7 Days in the Art World, which you mentioned. Each one has really impacted me hugely. So I'm now kind of an insider to the art world. That's why I identify with Alice.
Well, it's funny. Alice in Wonderland is my favorite bronze sculpture. I go over to it in Central Park, just down the street. You are really a woman from the many people who have interviewed that people really seem to like opening up to you. What is the art of being someone just showing their true colors, even if some of them said they wouldn't let you in their kitchen originally? I think.
Yeah.
Or into their home, I should say.
Different people draw the line in different places. And for this book, I didn't go into many kitchens. Actually,
no.
I don't.
The book we're speaking of, you did 33 Artists. Is that the one?
For 33 Artists and 3 Acts, I definitely did. And yes, so because I love a kitchen table conversation, and I love to talk over food. So I was in Ai Weiwei's kitchen, a Chinese meal with rice and chicken, and very homey and tasty. The whole crew, he runs a studio where everyone eats together.
Oh, that's great.
Just like Francis Elise down in Mexico City. Neither of them were the one doing the cooking, but they're the lady who did the cooking for them all at lunch in Mexico City. Her name was Mercedes.
Oh, wow.
And so that was with Francis Elise.
What I loved, by the way, they said that you were such a good mediator. And I liked you being described. I was like, you know what? She could be probably a really good lawyer, that's Sarah Thornton, because it seems like you're very balanced about things when you write. And they also called you a seducer. And they also said you have the potential to reach audiences and you make the information accessible. And I thought that's all so dead on correct.
I care about being read. So much writing about art and also academic writing is unpleasant to read. It's not fun. And if you're not in a course where you're required to read it, then nobody reads it. So I like to bring some rigor to my research. I like to create books that are robust and have some, even if I'm not a historian, I hope they have some historical importance. I hope someone can go back to them 50 years from now and go, oh, wow, this is actually what was happening at this time. Access is very important to me, especially when you're in an elite world.
Very elite.
Or when you've managed to get some amazing backstage passes to something. I think lawyer is right. I'm very interested in many different sides of the story. A good lawyer has to understand all the arguments.
And you also seem to be an appreciator, of the right people to learn from. I had read that you had this, I don't know if he was a teacher, a mentor, how you would describe him, Simon Frith.
Simon Frith was my PhD supervisor, and he is a sociologist of music, a much published, much honored sociologist of music. I went over to the UK to do my PhD with him, and he supervised the PhD that became the book Club Cultures: Music, Media, and Subcultural Capital. He was also not just an academic, but a prolific writer, and he used to be the primary music critic for the Sunday Times like 30 years ago or more. I learned a massive amount from him. And also
and you were up
during
all
that
night at clubs on top of that.
I was, and I swore that after completing my PhD, I swore I would never do research at night again.
And then Tits Up happened.
Yes. And then when I decided that I needed to investigate breasts in American real life, I found myself in strip clubs and so-called titty bars. Nothing happens in those places till after 10 p.m. So I'd arrive at 9:45. I'd be the only person in there.
You got the best seat in the house.
Except for a few regulars at the bar, who kind of were like friends of friends and stuff. So
tell us about some of those characters, like Barbie. Barbie, I just loved. Condor.
It's the Condor. Yeah, it's actually a historic landmark officially now.
Is it a strip
in San
club
Francisco?
Or a burlesque? What is it called?
No, it's actually a strip club. It's not very burlesque at all.
Okay.
Barbie, who opens that chapter, she was stripping at the Condor, but she also had another life as a burlesque dancer. And she also worked as a nanny and worked at a circus in their costume department. So she was juggling a lot of jobs.
What kind of breasts did she have, or tits?
Yeah, well, tits is a key word in a strip club. I mean, the patrons are not usually commenting on breasts. It's a bit more, hey, the tits on that gal, float my boat or whatever.
And you don't like the word boobs. I know that.
Well, all of this was part of my journey, I guess you could say. I grew up using the word boobs. And then when I started doing my research, I realized that there's a whole history of breasts being associated with stupidity. And I didn't like this word boob because it affiliated our torsos, the female top half, with idiocy and silliness and irrelevance in a certain way. Booby traps and booby prizes and the boob tube. And, isn't he a boob? Meaning, isn't he an idiot? So boobs, I still use the word because it's friendly and accessible and you're allowed to say it on broadcast television. But, I prefer other words. And one word that I did not use initially at all was the word tits. And it was actually while I was in the strip club, and that was the word that all the gals in there used to describe their own breasts, because that is the eroticized, sexualized, commodified version of our mammary glands. That chapter is called "Hardworking Tits," and in a pretty specific way.
By the way, you did define in the book about where the origin of the word, was it like ｃｈηｃｈηｃχ?
Well, it's a very old word, and
right.
its origins are not entirely known, but right. It comes from teats, and it's kind of another version of teats. It probably has multiple sources too. Tetta is Italian, and it definitely goes back to Latin, but it could have deeper roots in Indo-European, because there are sources that bring it round through potentially Anglo-Saxon roots. And so it's a really ancient word for something that was not necessarily, well, certainly not sexualized and not necessarily offensive, just descriptive. Barbie was like a, modest B cup.
Did she wear a top when she danced, or did she not have a top on? Standard
in the strip clubs around here is that 2 songs are danced with a bikini top on, and the third one is topless. Fairly standard in, west of the Mississippi.
Who knew?
And in San Francisco, you need to keep your G-string on, or a teeny bit of a bikini bottom on, if the establishment serves alcohol. The fully nude places cannot serve alcohol, which usually means people are really high on drugs. I'm not sure how effective that legislation is. Local municipal laws, they vary from city to city and town to town.
And these women.
But Barbie's a great character. She's really intelligent, really articulate. She's went to university. She studied, media and communications and culture. She's thoughtful about the male gaze. She's thoughtful about her own gaze and how it confronts others and is a form of, humanizing. When the strippers will target people in the audience and look at them partly as a way to kind of invite them in and say, hey, would you like to shower me with bills on the dance floor? Or would you, like lap dance, in so many words? Some people shy away. Some people all of a sudden look down at their phone. Others, stare back in different kinds of ways. So she is not a dupe of patriarchy or, someone who's a victim at all. She knows what she's doing and has chosen to make a living this way. And sometimes that's an important reminder to some judgmental, moralistic feminists or women who care about women's rights and care about the right to choose, let's say, the right to choose your employment, your bra styles, and different forms of bodily autonomy.
I love that you went into about Joe Boobs Weldon and that whole story, which you can maybe share a little bit, because he said something about, some of us are consensual sex workers. We're willingly selling sex. We're not all our victims. And, strippers and sex workers sometimes choose that, which is hard for a lot of people to digest.
We have very visceral reactions to the way, to our relationships with our bodies and to our thoughts about other people's bodies. Like, we don't want to think about our parents having sex. We, but we might be find it very squeamish to think about our children having sex. There's a lot of whorephobia in our culture that may never go away. I've never had the experience of stripping in front of a predominantly male crowd. I've never engaged with sex work, but I really listened carefully to the women who were sharing their stories with me. They enjoy their work as much as other people enjoy their work, possibly more. They've found it a good way to make a living. My feeling is that we may have these visceral reactions, but that doesn't mean we should assume that we can make choices for other people. Mm-hmm. And so, I liken sex work to the issue of abortion in a lot of ways, because I feel very lucky. I've never had an abortion. It's not a nice thing. Nobody wants to have an abortion. It's not a great choice. It's a decision made in difficult circumstances. Just because it's not something nice, and because I have a visceral reaction to it, doesn't mean that I should decide what another woman does, or that I should decide what, not for me to decide. And I feel like the women's movement would be stronger if we could bring more people together, if we could be a little more disciplined about not dissing on women who've had breast augmentations, not dissing on women who are showing their nipples through a t-shirt, but, accidentally or intentionally, not dissing on women who are strippers. It's hard. It is a discipline, but I feel like, for me, that's my personal moral obligation, I guess.
Yes.
Is to just look, we come from different educations, different class backgrounds, different races and ethnicities. I've been so-called straight. I've been queer. I was like a college lesbian. Then I came in and I came out, and I've never been, I've had friends who used to call me like a failed lesbian or whatever, because I couldn't, stick the course properly or whatever. Yeah. So, why,
you're no longer.
Maybe it's a good thing to admit that one isn't perfect, that I am not perfect, and that I've made, I live with my decisions. I'm not someone to regret my decisions at all. God forbid I should have to make decisions for anyone else.
Well, you have to make decisions on what you're going to put in your book.
Yes. And I feel very proud of Tits Up, actually. It's my 4th book. I think it's my best book. It's thoroughly researched. There's some really wonderful characters, a broad range of diverse voices, and with amazing stories to tell about their top halves. And, I learned a lot doing the research, and various friends and some reviewers, talk about it as a healing journey. It's, the book, by the time you get to the end of it, you actually think, God, I kind of appreciate these gals. They're, I gotta love them a little more.
I have to say, I learned a new word, misandrist. And I always thought, wow, there's actually, I was wondering if these women hated men. That's what I was curious about.
I mean, I don't think they hate men. I think it's interesting. I didn't know that word either. I was familiar with misogynist, not misandrist. Barbie taught me that word because she said her mother was a misandrist. Yes. So she was brought up by a mother who kind of taught her not to trust men. That might be a common theme. Successful sex workers are performers.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is not a real orgasm. Like, so they're seductresses, and they're femme fatale in one sense.
And it's interesting because these clubs are all run by and owned by men, right? It's a whole conglomerate. I hear it's a big real estate portfolio that they have, this particular club.
So the Condor is owned by Deja Vu, which is one of the largest strip club owners in America, if not the world. Yes, it's I don't think there's a single woman-owned strip club in America. And I also did research, I don't write about it, but I did research into the brothels in Nevada, and there's not a single woman-owned brothel in Nevada either. And that was one of the reasons that I came down in the end on the side of decriminalization rather than legalization of sex work. Legalization is a really different model. And basically that's kind of like, government enforced pimping almost. It's like, the brothels in Nevada are, you have to pay $250,000 a year to get your license. Well, the women don't have the money.
Right.
And then you kind of get into these odd things. You wonder if organized crime's involved. You wonder if there's other, criminal activities going on adjacent to something that's a legal activity. And, the one thing to note about it is that despite the fact that prostitution is legal in many counties of Nevada, it is not legal in Las Vegas or Reno or any of the big cities. And that's where the vast majority of sex work takes place. Really? So even in Nevada, most sex work is of the illegal variety. Well, a real shame for a lot of reasons. One, because it puts women in terrible positions where they can be abused, beaten, raped with no recourse. I think working class women, of which 99.9% of sex workers need protections, and
that's why Playboy there was a whole lawsuit, right? Back in 1953.
Well, Playboy. So that's a different part of the book where I'm writing about magazines and film, movies and things like that. So there's a really fascinating history to the representation of bare breasts in magazines in America. So for many years, the only place you could see bare breasts was in National Geographic.
Right.
And there, in the early 20th century, in the 20s and 30s and 40s, various nudist magazines cropped up. And I mean, they were pretty innocent by our standards, like naked groups playing volleyball, naked groups sunbathing. And so there was a magazine called Sunshine and Health, which was the official journal of the Sunbathing Association of America. And the Postmaster General kept seizing their magazine because there were topless women in it. And actually, sometimes even bottomless men, but never on the cover. The cover would always have, well, they were not bottomless. They were kind of shadowed. You could never see down there, even if someone was entirely naked. They were nudists.
I as a child went.
It wasn't. There was no explicit sex, not even kissing in these magazines. Sometimes you'd have children in the pictures too. They're at the beach. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, represented Sunshine and Health in the argument that the Postmaster General was discriminating against white breasts. And they won the case.
They won.
And then it went to appeal like 3 times. It took forever. It was like between the late 40s and 1953, they finally won their final appeal. It was determined that, topless women were okay. The Postmaster General would not intervene. 6 months later, that's when Playboy magazine was started. So it's intriguing.
You have had very good timing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he was really interested in civil liberties and no doubt was following the case.
Absolutely. No doubt.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to me because, I mean, you're everywhere in this book. You speak about, we just touched on this, I think, enough to give everyone a taste of what's going on with hardworking tits. I think that was the chapter, what it's called.
Yeah, that's chapter 1.
And then I love that you jump into life-saving jugs. And I'm like, what the heck is she talking about? I mean, I thought it was a life-saving account. And then I'm like, oh my God, it is. It's a milk banks or about lactation and about, well, you can express yourself best, but breast is best is what I learned from that chapter.
There are 2 areas that were much written about. One, there's a lot of books on breastfeeding and how to breastfeed. And then there's a fair number of books on breast cancer. And I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And I thought, how can I add to all this literature on breastfeeding? Yes. And so I, started doing my preliminary research, and all of a sudden a few lactation consultants started talking about the oldest milk bank in America, which happens to be my local milk bank in San Jose. And so through that milk bank, I contacted some of their high capacity donors. So women who had donated gallons and gallons and gallons of milk to, very importantly, save the lives of premature infants in the NICU.
Wow.
Basically, premature babies are very vulnerable to something called necrotizing enterocolitis, which is basically gangrene of the gut. And they can die. And if they don't die, they're often in hospital for years, recovering from surgeries, and will often have developmental delays and things like that. The human milk donated to the hospitals through the milk banks is really significant. And this milk bank as well will enable the milk to go to foster children, adoptive children, babies born to women who've had double mastectomies in their, let's say you have breast cancer in your 20s and you give birth in your 30s, you have no breasts, no milk. So I was fascinated by what the milk bank did, and fascinated to learn.
And it's expensive. I learned from you, like $4,000 a month. I don't know how people can even afford it.
Well, mostly it goes through
WIC or something.
No, WIC does not.
WIC is
buy
formula.
any.
Formula. Okay.
WIC is a totally different beast, and the biggest buyer. Unfortunately, the federal government gives these milk banks, there are 33 of them in North America, no support, but they are the largest buyer of formula in the world. And so the WIC, in some WIC offices, they really do their best to help women breastfeed because poor women of all women really are the least able to afford formula. And there are many reasons to breastfeed, not just related to the fact it's the best thing for the baby, but it's actually the best thing for the mother in terms of her long-term health, mitigating against postpartum depression, against breast cancer and ovarian cancer in the future, and also, weirdly, against diabetes, heart disease, and obesity.
I read
So
in your
breastfeeding when you are a young mother can impact your long-term
health.
weight.
Wow. Yeah, and I read it elevates your
not to mention the baby's weight, because there's a correlation between obesity and formula.
Oh, that's so interesting. And it elevates your oxytocin. I read decreases cholesterol, which is what you're mentioning with I guess the weight issue, and decreases stress. And I'm like, I think my favorite expression is building liquid bridges. So the connection between the mother and the child, I guess, is that what that means? I assume.
And also other women, because one of the things that was amazing and heartwarming to me about these donors is that they come from all walks of life. In California in particular, they were, Democrats and Republicans. They were, Catholics and atheists, Hindu, Buddhist, very multiracial and unified in their commitment to the health of the next generation, and in providing this liquid gold, as it's called, to benefit the health of babies they didn't even know, especially in our time of like self-righteous anger and nastiness, to have such a beautiful phenomenon happening in various places all over America.
So breastfeeding is sort of a democratic, you're saying it's for all people, all levels of society, wealth, backgrounds. It's not for one, like some women do it for longer than others. I read some were doing it for a year.
I mean, there are definitely racial and class biases towards the women who breastfeed. But the donors at this particular San Jose Milk Bank are really across the board. I don't think, though, that it goes down party political lines. I think it is much more about class. Women who are wage workers, who, have no maternity leave, who are more hand to mouth in their, rent and car payments, are less likely to breastfeed because the logistics of it at first are really tricky. One of the characters in Tits Up in Life Saving Jugs is a wage worker. She is Vietnamese and she works at an office supply store. And, she's actually at this moment when I'm interviewing her, working a 50-hour week because it's back to school season and everyone's going in for their school supplies. It is possible, but it's also tricky. It's harder than, let's say, a tech worker who can work from home easily, or someone who gets 3 months maternity leave, which allows you to kind of establish breastfeeding, especially if it's your first child. Breastfeeding is really hard in this weird world we live in. We don't live in a natural world. And, most women have this very conflicted, confused view of what these things do, these mammary glands, because, they're sexy and they're kind of for their husband. But now all of a sudden you flip a switch and they're like nutrition and hydration for your new love of your life. It's confusing. That does not make breastfeeding easy. It makes it even harder, which is why it's important to know that the only evolutionary reason why women have breasts is to feed the young. Right. There is no evolutionary reason, and actually it's not universal, and it's a fairly recent thing that they're considered sexually attractive to men. And that's shocking to a lot of people.
Well, it's interesting what you go through. I think what you went through personally, if I can mention it yourself. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
how you found out or what age you were, but I was curious, like how that the loss of breasts, how did that make you feel as a woman and your partner or your wife in this case, who then was, I guess, bearing the child, and also women that have cancer, who are all, breast cancer does not have to do with how wealthy you are or what political positioning you're in, what side of the aisle you are. And that's sort of very interesting that when you go through something health wise, when it comes to your breasts, it's like we're all in the same boat. And I was curious about how that was for you when you were 20 something and had these, I don't know what size breasts you had. I know you ended up with larger breasts than you meant to when you went through your surgery. But
Yeah.
so,
So I mean, well, basically in 2018, I'd been monitored for 7 years, and I'd had many biopsies because I had all these rogue cells in my breasts. Every time, and they kept developing, and I seemed to be having more of them. So after 7 years of monitoring, the doctor said, well, we haven't actually found the cancer, but we think you might have cancer. I had ductal carcinoma in situ, I guess. I had so much, it was so spread out and there was so much of it that they thought, it's quite possible that we just haven't pulled it out, because we could pull it out from here. Right? I didn't have a discrete lump. I thought I'd actually just have a unilateral mastectomy on the left side, but then they said, no, there's a 40% chance you got cancer in the other one. I was like, okay, enough. I can't take this any longer. It's so stressful. So I had a double mastectomy and was very lucky. They just pulled out a lot of precancer. I did not have anything that had metastasized into or invaded anything else. So, and then I had reconstruction. And going into reconstruction, I'd heard from some friends that sometimes a reconstruction becomes an augmentation. And I was like, this is not for me. I love swimming. I love yoga. I do not want, I had big boobs when I was pregnant and breastfeeding, and it was not very comfortable for me. And I was like, I don't want to go back there. So,
you had an opportunity to change that.
Yeah, well, and then so I went into the surgery with like a B cup. So I said to the surgeon, I said, look, I want lesbian yoga boobs. I like, think of them as between an A and a B. Give me A plus boobs, I said, and as a joking but serious. So the first time I was measured for a bra, which was about 3 months later, because you need the swelling to go down, and it's a lot to recover from.
I'm sure.
Might have been 4 months even. I discovered, as I suspected, that I was a D cup. I couldn't fit into my clothes. I was bumping into door frames. I would oddly, weirdly graze my nipple on door frames a fair amount. I was like, really? Like, am I that clumsy? But I think, it threw my whole center of gravity off.
And then you had
that was the experience.
Where did you come up with the nickname Bert and Ernie?
Bert and Ernie. Oh, bless them. The Muppets. I mean, that's just what they felt like. The implants felt dumb compared to my old breasts. The old breasts were like, you knew when you were cold, you knew when you were expecting your period, you knew if you had the potential to be aroused. Sometimes you even knew if you were frightened. You get those like tingly sensations because you got vertigo or something. And the Muppets were just blank. There was like, all of a sudden I realized how kind of sentient and sensitive my breasts were when I lost all my nerve endings and had implants instead. And so I called them Bert and Ernie. They didn't feel like they were female. They didn't feel like they were part of me. Anyway, so that's what I had when I went into many operating rooms to watch many plastic surgeries, which is chapter 3, called Treasured Chests, because we spend a fortune on them.
You said 2021, 3.8 billion in revenue in the US. And that was in 2021. That number, like, and then, and 2007, I guess augmentation was the biggest surgery until 2021. And then liposuction took over, you said.
It is interesting to look at the statistics because breast augmentations, they reached their high point in 2007. And then they've been kind of plateauing, and then other surgeries have been coming into the fore. So breast lifts are very popular and one of those surgeries that are increasing in popularity, and also explantations or implant removals. And of course, if you have an implant removal, then you kind of have to have a lift too, because if your breasts are all stretched out by implants, you've got all that extra skin and you've kind of destroyed the shape of your natural breasts. So it is often the case that a woman will have a lift with an explantation. And of course, reductions continue. And then there's trans surgeries, feminizations and masculinizations. One of the surgeons who's a key character in 셔셔셔셔, this chapter, her specialty is the post-bariatric upper body lift. So what happens when someone's lost 300 pounds?
Yes.
And like, you're not sure where her nipples are.
Right.
And then of course, very significantly, and particularly for me personally, are all the reconstructions. And the doctor who specializes in that surgery in the book is someone called Dr. Elizabeth Potter, based in Austin, Texas. And she's a very sensitive surgeon, and her specialty is something called a deep flap, where she takes the adipose tissue, the kind of fatty belly flesh, not the muscle though. She's very careful not to take any muscle because she doesn't want to deprive a woman of her strength, and then transplants it to the breast. And it's a quite incredible surgery.
So are you getting liposuction
because it's
time?
living tissue, it's warm living tissue as opposed to silicone implants.
But does that mean you're getting liposuction from your tummy? Why? And then that could put no, that's not liposuction.
It's not liposuction. Actually, liposuction, the problem with liposuction is that only 30% of it grafts properly. That's called fat grafting. Right. And so if you take a pound of fat out of your belly and you put it up in the breast, only a third of it will transplant properly. And then the problem is that your body wants to get fat somewhere else. And so often women will all of a sudden find they've got like lots of fat on their arms that they never had before, or their face. So I did have a little liposuction as part of Bert and Ernie, the arrival of Bert and Ernie, because when they strip away all the flesh on the inside of your chest because they're worried about cancer, they will often take a little fat and hope that it will graft onto the breast so that it's not just skin and implant. So now, unfortunately, they took it from the front of my belly and I just got it on my back now,
Oh no.
Or at least 2/3 of it. It comes back. It just comes back in a different place because they've removed those fat cells. I am not a medical doctor and I'm not a plastic surgeon, but I'd be wary of too much liposuction. It doesn't go away forever.
Right. Well,
and it doesn't graft. It doesn't fully graft. I mean, maybe, about a third of it grafts and the other 2/3 just becomes a problem somewhere else.
Well, you ended up naming them your newer. So you went through a second round of reconstruction, right? And
exactly. So after I finished the book.
After you finished the book.
Yeah, because I just couldn't. Oh my God. I had to finish the book before I could. I'm not like someone who loves surgery.
Who does?
I find it stressful and I get anxious and I think, oh geez, I'm going to be the unlucky one who has a blood clot and goes into a coma.
Listening to you makes me anxious. I mean,
I'm sorry. I don't want to.
No.
I mean,
I'm just thinking of Joan Rivers when she went in for whatever number plastic surgery she had, and then she didn't live.
Yeah. Some people are more relaxed about it than I am, but I waited till I finished the book. And then I went in, saw a woman plastic surgeon. So Bert had basically was flat side out. So, an implant is a half circle, is a hemisphere. And so the flat side was out and the round side was facing my ribs. So that was Bert. And then Ernie, I had capsular contracture. He was like migrating under my armpit and he really hurt. And when they went in to do the surgery, they discovered that one had ruptured. So I had one flipped and one ruptured after only 5 years. I had a woman plastic surgeon go in and put in smaller implant, get rid of that mess and put in smaller implants. And now I don't know exactly why I call them, but they're Glenda and Brenda. They're women. They're named after women now. And they feel much more comfortable for me personally. And it's not because I don't love big boobs or, or whatever. It's just like, it's such a personal thing. What feels right to you and your sense of self, It's funny because there was a wonderful review in the New Yorker.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I read that. That's great.
A lovely, long 3-page, thoughtful review, which I really appreciated and I'm grateful for. But one of the things that she said towards the end of the review was that I personally didn't like big boobs. And then I actually felt like writing in and saying, have you seen my wife? Like,
as in
she's quite busty, and I love her and I love all of her, and actually I've always appreciated a generous cleavage. I think it's a friendly, sociable, pro-social thing to do, to show off your cleavage. I am not someone who's felt that comfortable doing that personally, but I'm always like, I'm a fan. Can I just say I want to set the record straight. I'm a fan of a generous cleavage. So
I was reading my book. I was telling you about Bad Girls, and it seemed like all the women that I liked in it, like, loved their breasts, whether it was a Dolly Parton or a Josephine Baker or a Christine Jorgensen, who of course is transgender, but they were very much about that. Their breasts were Betty Page, as part of who they are and what they are, and they were proud of their whatever you want to name them. Hopefully not Hooters.
Yeah, Hooters, not my favorite word, but go for it if you want to use that word. I mean, one of the things that I encourage women to do is have fun with the language, because there are 700 words in the English language for breasts, and most of them are used by men.
Yes.
I mean, women have, for the most part, retreated into a couple of words. They're boobs and breasts if you're white, maybe breasts and titties if you're black. We might have some pet names, in our families. But for the most part, I think partly because it's associated with shame, which makes me angry, actually, because, the iconic male chest of Jesus Christ or the Buddha, this is a sacred chest. This is not shameful. So why should we feel shame about our chests when you go into any museum and the greatest icons of sacred, authentic, honest spirituality is a man's chest? So the final chapter in the book, chapter 5, is called Holy Memories. And I interviewed a lot of religious figures, rabbis and reverends and Hindu scholars and Buddhists, trying to make some sense of the relationship between breasts and various religions. But I couldn't find one location that would really work as a site to explore this. The strip club, the operating room, the milk bank, they all kind of, and then the bra design studio for chapter 4.
Right, bra design.
They all kind of became obvious, but this was really difficult. And then a friend of mine who's a professor of English at Stanford said, have you ever heard of Fool's Journey? And I actually go every year. And, and so I learned more about it. And basically it's this neo-pagan retreat in the Redwoods where oftentimes, if it's warm enough, women will go topless. It's predominantly female, although there's usually a few men there, kind of husbands and supporters. And it's a feminist camp, but not exclusively female, knowledgeable about the history of goddesses, be it Artemis or Diana, Hecate, Sekhmet, Egyptian, Greek, Celtic, Hindu on occasion too. Some of them were brought up in a very religious way, which is interesting. So one of the neo-pagans at the retreat is an ex-nun.
Did she go topless?
Yeah, she does go topless, and actually, she's a one-breasted ex-nun
Oh my God.
because she'd had a mastectomy. She'd had breast cancer,
Oh my God.
and she and I go for a swim after I give a topless talk to a pile of topless crones. And crone is a positive word within the culture. It's about embracing your age, and the eldest of the group was 95,
Right.
and she was amazing. There were a few women in their 30s, but really it skewed 65 and up. It was an amazing experience where I kind of delved into different stories in the Torah, in the Old Testament, the New Testament, within different traditions of Hinduism, and also the Buddhist tradition. So, I don't interview any children, and my characters are all adults, and there's enough there's diversity of age. So I guess like my age cohort is anything between about 23 and 95. The arrival of the breast buds is a very vulnerable moment for young girls in unsafe family environments, unfortunately. And in war situations, having breasts can make you vulnerable to rape. And it's interesting how it signals adulthood, even if you're 10 years old. I'm really interested in aging and the aging breast. And when someone complains to me about their saggy breasts, I'm like, maybe we should just think of them as sagacious. Sagacious,
Great word.
is a synonym for wise. And in some cultures, it is true that, she with a low song breasts is given extra respect. Judgment around aging in women is much harsher than it is with men.
You know about technology too, if I recall. So besides a little bit, I don't know if you've written on it, but I know you mentioned ChatGTP knows nothing about breasts, which I thought was so interesting in one of your interviews. And there's no written record on women's breasts. They're not being like brought up in the marketplace. And I said, oh my God, that's so interesting. So, and there's not many books about breasts, and there's not many, but there was an exhibition in Venice that I thought I was fascinated, called Breasts, right? When you were just there. And I was specifically fascinated because you just even brought this up a moment ago. So this was in the Venice Biennale, which is going on right now, in the 16th century Palazzo Franchetti. And you walk in, and the first exhibition is something called Booby Trap. And I thought, oh, that's unusual, the first thing. And it's an art installation by Buchanan Studio. And I wanted to ask you about these breast lights and how you felt about that exhibition, being that you have written a book about the art world. And it's a very famous book. And you also have a wife who's an important art dealer.
I really enjoyed the show. I am fascinated by the depiction of breasts. I think that I'm particularly fascinated by how younger women artists are depicting their breasts nowadays, because there's a lot more going on in that domain than there used to be. I love the booby trap entrance. It was a very long tunnel with a kind of silky pink fabric with these kind of pendulous breast lights along the top. And it was very funny and cozy. It was kind of warm. I mean, it was kind of like, nuzzling into your mama's bosom or something. It was fun. And then the first room had some really fabulous works in it, including a lactating Madonna, from the Renaissance or the Baroque, a very small, beautiful, historic piece, and mixed in with other more recent paintings. For me, I think the show could have been 85% female artists. Mm-hmm. I was actually really appreciated seeing the Duchamp and the Salvador Dali. But that's me. I was not the curator, and thank God they went to the trouble of doing it. And
by the way, it was a female curator.
It was thought provoking and great. Carolina Pasti did it. I think she did a great job. Yeah. There were a fair number of breasts at Art Basel in Switzerland. Okay. I went to Switzerland before Venice. There were a few stands that had multiple artworks with intriguing and fun breasts on them.
Well, thank you for being that sort of fly on the wall, whether it was with this book, 7 Days in the Art World, or this book, or what are the other two? I don't have them here. There's Tits Up or Jugs Up.
And, 33 Artists in 3 Acts. And the first book is Club Culture's Music,
And
Media, and Subcultural Capital.
We're working on right now?
No. I am
writing for The Economist or anyone else articles that we can follow you on.
Not yet. I'm trying to take a few months off, and then I will resume journalism in the autumn. Okay. And I'm not sure what I'm going to write about. But thanks for asking.
Yes.
And I'll keep you updated.
I want to just say thank you, Sarah. And even though you're on the left coast and I'm on the right coast, I think we're fairly centrists as people.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Keep up balancing your balancing act, and thank you for sharing such beautiful knowledge and creating the color and the humor.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Really appreciate your feedback on Tits Up, 7 Days, and all the rest. Thank you.
Please listen and subscribe to the show on YouTube. In addition, wherever you listen to podcasts, please share and leave a review. Thank you.